Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Kymyona Burk. I'm the Visiting Literacy Fellow with TeachSOR and your moderator for today's discussion, From Awareness to Action, How Educator Preparation Programs Can Advance the Science of Reading from Policy to Practice. So some of you may be wondering what TeachSOR is, right? We launched a couple of months ago on LinkedIn, and you can advance to the next slide. Thank you. We launched a couple of months ago on LinkedIn, and the goal is to serve as an open access resource for instructors and teacher preparation programs who are working to prepare teachers to enter classrooms ready to successfully promote their students' literacy proficiency. But what does that really mean? With this resource, it really grew out of a need to address the gap between what educator preparation programs are expected to do and to provide those resources needed to help them do it. And that is encompassed by our vision in ensuring that this is a national resource that advances our ed prep through continuous learning, collaboration, and emerging literacy research. But the resources curated on TeachSOR have become much more than that, really just in a short period of time. These resources support faculty, institutional leaders, our teacher candidates, and classroom teachers have also found these resources very beneficial to the work that they're doing in our K-12 classrooms. The resources on our site are organized into 6 focus areas to support the programs, faculty, and our future teachers. And these 6 focus areas include faculty development and program planning, resources around syllabi refinement, and other opportunities for faculty development, also reading foundations with research, instructional systems and curricula, assessment and data-based decision-making, being able to address different learning needs, such as our students with dyslexia and other learning differences, and an opportunity to access literacy development modules, micro-credentials, other opportunities for faculty to enhance their knowledge and skills around the science of reading. TeachSOR's resources are meant to serve as a support, and it's a great backdrop for our conversation today. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. First, we have Ron Noble, who is the Chief of Teacher Preparation at NCTQ. Ron leads NCTQ's work to improve aspiring teachers' access to high-quality educator preparation programs. His career spans classroom teaching, district leadership, state education policy, and teacher preparation, giving him a very unique perspective on how systems can strengthen teacher readiness. Ron brings a national lens to our conversation today, including what current data tells us about educator preparation and the policies and practices that support effective implementation. Welcome. Dr. Lauren Brannan is currently the Regional Literacy Specialist at the Alabama Reading Initiative. Dr. Brannan supports literacy faculty across Alabama's educator preparation programs while also working directly with some of the state's highest need schools. Her experience as a classroom teacher, professor, letters facilitator, and teacher preparation evaluator gives her firsthand insight into how institutions translate evidence-based literacy practices into coursework and teacher training. She brings a state implementation perspective to the discussion, highlighting the supports and structures that help move change forward. Welcome, Lauren. And last, but definitely not least, is Dr. Simone Gibson, Associate Professor at Morgan State University and Assistant Director for Literacy at the National Center for the Elimination of Education Disparities. Dr. Gibson's work focuses on advancing equitable literacy instruction through educator preparation, research, and policy. As a teacher educator and literacy researcher, she prepares future teachers in evidence-based reading instruction while leading initiatives that address literacy inequities and support diverse learners. She brings an institutional perspective on implementation and the importance of ensuring that evidence-based literacy practices meets the needs of all learners. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome, Simone. So the format for today's webinar will include the panelists providing an overview of their work in this space, followed by a discussion among all of our panelists. I believe there is a Q&A box. If you click on the three dots at the bottom, it says more, and you're able to submit questions during this process, and we will try to address as many as we can towards the end of today's discussion. But Ron, we're going to start with you. I think a pretty meaningful report was released by NCTQ earlier this month. And I will now turn it over to you to get started to tell us a little bit about what you found.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Burke and the TeachSOR team for inviting me to share our findings from our report that just came out on June 9th as part of our teacher prep review focused on reading foundations. Report's called Decoding Progress in Reading Preparation. So if you advance to the next slide. This report is hinging on our core belief at the National Council on Teacher Quality that teacher preparation is an absolutely essential part of the solution to address the reading challenges we see for students across the country. We know aspiring reading teachers need to know how to provide scientifically based reading instruction, and that it's within their teacher prep programs where they are best able to develop a strong foundation in the 5 core components of SBRI and how to teach reading to diverse student learner groups. We also know from the research that effective reading preparation can increase both teachers' content knowledge and the confidence they bring to the classroom. And so our basic premise for the report is ultimately better teacher preparation will lead to better student outcomes. And with that framing, I'm really excited to share sort of 3 high-level findings from our report. The first is that despite progress, and I will talk about the significant amount of progress we saw across the country in teacher prep program alignment to scientifically based reading instruction, we are still in a situation where roughly half of teacher prep programs are not yet fully aligned to scientifically based reading instruction. So I'm just going to take a couple slides and just explain how we get to that conclusion. So what we do at NCTQ is we collect course material from elementary teacher prep programs across the country. This report, the final sample, includes 721 of those elementary programs. And we look at the extent to which their course materials are aligned to the 5 components of scientifically based reading instruction, which you can see on the screen. And in particular, what we're looking for are whether programs are providing opportunities for candidates to receive direct instruction in those 5 core components. And then whether or not they're being assessed in those 5 components, whether or not they have course-embedded practice opportunities to apply what they've learned in their coursework around those 5 core components. And then finally, that background materials category represents the textbooks and key readings that professors are assigning in each of those required reading courses, and the extent to which those materials are aligned to scientifically based reading instruction. So we have a team of expert reading analysts that go through each course syllabus, and we aggregate all of that information up to provide a detailed snapshot of what each program is providing their candidates when it comes to delivering strong reading instruction. At the same time we're doing that work, we're also looking at the extent to which programs are providing opportunities for candidates to develop the unique skills and knowledge they need to meet the needs of 3 specific student learner groups. So that includes English learners, it includes struggling readers, which may or may not mean that a child has a formal diagnosis of a reading challenge like dyslexia. It could also just be attending to the needs of students who are behind grade level for a variety of reasons. And then the third student learner group we look at are speakers of English language varieties other than general American English, the most common of which in the United States is African American English. And so there we're looking for whether or not programs have embedded opportunities for teacher candidates to understand the connection between language as it's spoken in the home and language as it's expected to be spoken in schools, and have that ability to support students to translate between those two language varieties. And so this slide just shows that progress story that I alluded to at the top of this finding. So if NCTQ assigns each teacher prep program a letter grade of A through F. An A or A plus signals full alignment to those 5 core components. And an F means that the program doesn't provide instruction in any of those 5 core components, or adequate instruction, I should say, or may be providing instruction in practices that run counter to the reading research, things like 3Qing. And so what we see on this slide is a comparison between our results from 2023 and the results we just put out a couple of weeks ago. And I think the great news here is that the teacher prep sector has largely responded to all of the attention over the last 3 years from advocates, from state policymakers, from reading professors, and any number of other forces. And what we see is that doubling of the percentage of programs that earned an A or an A plus on our most recent analysis. So we're at about a quarter of programs 3 years ago. We're at over half of programs in 2026, which is amazing. I think complementary to that finding is if you look on the other end of the spectrum at the percentage of programs earning an F, we see a big drop, 14 percentage point drop in the percentage of programs earning an F. All in total, it still means that just under half of programs have yet to meet that benchmark of full alignment. But I think we are seeing in our data this time around evidence of tremendous change within teacher prep in the last 3 years. Our second finding is related to those 3 student learner groups. And this is a little bit more sobering than that first one, which was promising. Here we saw very little movement actually in the percentage of programs providing adequate reading instruction focused on the specific needs of English learners, struggling readers, and speakers of English language varieties other than General American English. So we didn't see that similar big spike in improvement that we saw in the overall alignment to the 5 core components that we were hoping to see. Just to provide English learners as an example, we know that almost over 2/3 of teachers are going to have an English learner in their classroom at some point during their careers. And yet we haven't seen teacher prep programs universally respond to meet the needs of those students. So what we found in this go around is just 60% or 60% of programs dedicate fewer than 2 instructional hours for supporting English learners to read. And 84% of programs don't provide any practice opportunities that are specifically focused on meeting the needs of English learners. And our third sort of big headline finding from our national report is that we found that prep programs that fail to adequately prepare teachers to teach reading may be hiding from our review. And the way we got at that finding is we looked at all of the programs that chose not to participate in NCTQ's review. So obviously, we put out the request to all public elementary teacher prep programs and all private programs that generate at least 10 completers a year, 10 new teachers a year. And in the case of private programs, it's really up at their discretion whether or not they're going to share their course materials with us. For public programs, in many states, we have public records laws that we can rely on to obtain documents. But at the end of the day, we had over 400 programs that chose not to provide documents. So what we did is we looked at the university bookstore listings for all of the programs that chose not to provide course materials. And we identified the textbooks assigned in reading courses in almost all of them, 81% of them. And when we ran those textbooks through the same analysis we run for participating programs, we found that the non-participating programs use misaligned textbooks that are anchored in those contrary practices at roughly the same levels that programs earning a D or an F do. And so that suggests to us that there may be reasons why those programs chose not to participate in our review, that are connected to their continued teaching of debunked practices. Another quick analysis that we did is we looked at the programs that left our sample from 2023 to 2026, and 60% of those programs earned an F last time around. And so that suggests to me that those programs didn't make the changes they needed to make to align to the science of reading, and didn't want to come back and get another F, and so chose not to participate this time around. So I think all in total, what we have here is a package of a lot of good news and promising improvement, and then still some areas where additional support is needed to get the rest of the programs at that stage of full alignment.
Thank you so much, Ron. So there were several things that you mentioned that are, like you said, worth celebrating for sure, but also some that are, kind of brings up a few concerns. But I feel that there are solutions, right? Which is why we're having this conversation today, especially around, the English learners or the English varieties, and also our struggling readers. Um, right now, at least 33 states have adopted policies to align educator preparation programs with the science of reading, right? We have really begun to look at policy as a way to not, as many people believe, like just mandate things, but to really provide that support. I always say that accountability should come with a level of support, right? So asking educator preparation programs to align with the science of reading, what types of supports are being provided to help them do that? Of those 33 states, Alabama is one of them. So Lauren, talk to us a little bit about Alabama's approach to addressing EPP alignment. I know Alabama was one of the first states to kind of jump in and do this for many of your programs, right? Not just your elementary education program. So talk to us a bit about what's happening in Alabama around EPPs.
Thank you, Dr. Burk and the TeachSOR team for giving me this opportunity to highlight the growth that we've made in our Alabama EPPs over the last several years. I do want to clarify, because I get a few questions about this, what the Alabama Reading Initiative is. It is actually an arm of the State Department of Education, but we are a support entity only. We support teachers, principals, school districts, and now higher ed. We are not an evaluative entity. And so we get to really live in that support space that you were mentioning, Dr. Burk. So I first want to share with you a few major milestones that have really pushed our work forward in Alabama. The Alabama Literacy Act in 2019 really set the stage for how we do business with literacy in Alabama. But the external review that happened a couple of years later is the real catalyst for change. That was an external review of our programs that was very in-depth, beyond syllabi. It looked at assignments, it looked at field experiences, who was mentoring teachers in those experiences, their supervisors. Lots of interviews and things were a part of that external review. It was not easy. When those review results came out, it was a little shocking for some of our faculty. And so we had a lot of reflecting that we had to do, and then charting our path forward as a result of those reports. So after that external review, we also, or around that same time, the state required the Foundations of Reading test to be completed for certification in Alabama. That was also part of the Alabama Literacy Act. By 2022, we joined the Path Forward that really helped us to be part of a group that helped us come up with a plan for our path forward in Alabama. In 2023, our faculty submitted summaries to the State Department based on the feedback they had received in their individual reports from that external review. So we followed up on that, and they were able to share what they had been doing in their programs to address feedback. That same year, we hosted our first higher education science of reading symposium. So we're beginning to see that support come into play, where faculty were able to attend and share what they were doing in their coursework to help prepare candidates to be effective teachers of reading when they entered the classroom. Following that, in 2024, we adopted new standards for teacher preparation for literacy. Also, that year, the 3Qing was prohibited. I do want to mention those standards were created by a task force that included our higher education faculty. So now they are becoming part of this work. It's not work that's being done to them, it's something we're doing with them at this point. And then as we look ahead into 2027, we're coming back to that evaluative lens. Again, we have another hybrid review. I'm calling it a hybrid review because it's led by a team of external reviewers with teams of internal faculty who will be part of that review. And so we're excited for that to be a great learning experience for them to be part of that and have ownership in that review process and to learn some of those look-fors in the coursework. Next slide, please. All right, so that first slide was a lot about the pressure that we're getting, but the next 3 slides are about the support because we are all about support in the Alabama Reading Initiative. Our initiative is about coaching, and we have coaching from local reading specialists in every K-3 building in our state. Supported by a team of close to 100 regional specialists who support those local reading specialists. They support principals as well as school districts. And now we have rolled that out to where we have coaching for our higher ed professors. So here you see me and my partner, Dr. Tiffany Davis Hales. We are the 2 coaches here in Alabama. She supports the northern piece of the state, and I support the southern half. And we're so glad that we have state leaders who recognized that higher ed needed that support too, because it's beginning to help us create some cohesion between our K-12 schools and higher ed. And again, in this role, we get to be certainly, we are not evaluating faculty at all. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a conceptual model that I created as an attempt to describe how we are supporting faculty. Each area that you see is a priority for support. If we start at the bottom, you see that, at least here in Alabama, it's a red clay, right? That groundwork that we lay before we start laying the real foundation of a structure. That clay, in regard to our work, is building relationships. If we do not have strong relationships with our faculty, the rest of our structure will fall apart. And so the first couple of years, we worked really hard in this area to form relationships with our faculty and to build that trust. Our coaching model really supported that because we are here for support only. Next, we have that cement slab, which is building that strong foundation of the science of reading as well as the science of learning, because we not only need to know how to teach children how to read, we not only need to know the science of how children learn, but we need to know how adults learn to learn as well, because we are teaching young adults in our space in higher education. And so we've worked a lot for providing professional development in various ways for our faculty. Next, we get to that brick layer. That first brick on the left is aligning that curriculum to the science of reading. That speaks a lot to what Ron discussed, that looking at those syllabi. Our syllabus is our roadmap for our course. And so we have to first make sure that's aligned with the science of reading, and making sure those textbooks that are in the syllabi and other resources, that they're aligned with that science of reading. Of course, that builds from that knowledge piece that we built below. That second brick on the right is what happens after the syllabi. All right, I have my roadmap, but how am I going to design the instruction and how am I going to deliver that to my teacher candidates? So we have to think about, again, that science of learning, how adults learn, specifically novice learners. How do we teach them to be effective teachers of reading? And so we're looking at instructional design, and this is where we are finding a lot of our work in Alabama now that we have kind of aligned our curriculum to the science of reading. We're digging in a little deeper and looking at effective instructional design. That top brick is a science of reading aligned clinical and field experiences. We're getting a little more complex now because this requires work outside of our college or our university. We have to partner with districts and able to select effective mentor teachers who can model science of reading practices with the teacher candidates. We have to make sure that we're creating assignments for those field experiences that allow our candidates to practice the science of reading strategies and also receive some high quality feedback on their practice. So we're starting to move into that space a little more as well. The final priority for support is collective efficacy. That's our mortar. And you can see that that touches each of those areas. That's because we are building collective efficacy in our work in each of those other areas. John Hattie's work shows us that collective efficacy is strongly related to student achievement. And so that's why that is one of our priorities for support. And we've learned that we can achieve collective efficacy through mastery experiences, celebrating those small wins. We are certainly celebrating our good scores from the NCTQ report this month. And so that's giving us some great mastery experiences. We also can gain efficacy through vicarious experiences, observing others experience success. We can gain that through social persuasion. That's us providing that affirmation to our faculty about what it is they're doing. And then they're seeing those results in their candidates through their teaching, or they're hearing from school districts and principals about how well those new candidates are doing in the classroom. And finally, we can achieve collective efficacy through emotional arousal, which is working together as a team, which we do a lot of here in Alabama, and also building that sense of pride in our work. So even though we kind of build in this model through complexity as we get higher, I do want to mention that, we're not done with those bottom layers as we move to the top, because each of these layers requires some maintenance for sustainability. We have to continue to build relationships. We have to continue to refine our knowledge of the science of reading, revisit that curriculum. Is my instructional design working? And how are my field experiences working as we think through this work and how we support our faculty? And then you see the image of the team working together on a blueprint. That's because this is done as a team. We do this work with faculty, not to them. And so it is very much a collaborative space where we are working. Next slide, please. So here's a little about what this all looks like in practice. If you take a look at the bottom right, there's a couple of pictures with us sitting around a table. This is my partner and I. We meet with program faculty. We go through syllabi, we refine assignments, making sure they're aligned with our new standards, revisiting assessments, and program progression. So we're able to just sit down with faculty and be a think partner in this work. As you move up, you see some of our work from our EPP research to practice labs. Those are a new form of support we rolled out this past year, where faculty have the opportunity to visit the classrooms of their colleagues in the state and observe specific practices in action and focus on how those practices impact the learning of the teacher candidates. So we have an opportunity to learn about the program and see their syllabi and then go observe that practice happening, and then come back and debrief, and then answer questions and plan our next steps. This usually ends with next steps for the participants about how they can take what they've learned back to their classrooms, but also the host, the site host, gets lots of great feedback, positive, and ways that they can improve what it is that they're doing in their classrooms. In the top right corner, we see some faculty speaking at one of our Alabama Literacy Association conferences. We try to host sessions where we just have hot topic discussions where they can just have time to come together and talk about what's working, what we might be struggling with, and then we come up with some solutions together. We see a faculty member here modeling the HeartWord strategy. This is from our annual Science of Reading Symposium. So Dr. Keck modeled how she models for her candidates the HeartWord strategy. And in the bottom right, we see a photo from our first EPP, our collaborative kickoff. We'll have our second one this year, but this is an opportunity to celebrate our wins as a state, to come together and collaborate for a day, share what's working, ask questions, and set new goals for the year. And then also this year, we rolled out some Alabama summer and after school program grants in the state, which several of our EPPs applied for and were awarded. And so here you see a pre-service teacher leading small group instruction as part of summer learning here in Alabama. So this is an extension of their field experiences that we can continue to ensure they're getting lots of great practice before they enter the classroom. And that is all I have. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much. Listen, I'll say this. Sometimes EPPs really do get a bad rap, right? With faculty and change and the resistance to change. But really, thank you so much for showing that this is what policy into practice looks like. And I know your work, and I know some of these things were extra, right? Things that you all added because you knew that they would be beneficial to faculty. So thank you so much for that. I loved your model with the ingredients, right? Like what it takes, starting with relationships, because in any coaching, any partnership, relationships are really key. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Simone, I met you a few years ago, right? Maryland is fairly new to regulations around EPPs. So we just talked about the system in Alabama. So we're going to talk specifically about Morgan State University. But when we did meet a few years ago, you were already talking about EPP alignment in your course at Morgan State. So let's shift this conversation a little bit to what's happening in one particular program on the ground at Morgan State.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, for starters. It is always an absolute pleasure to learn and listen to folks who know so much about this work. Again, I'm Simone Gibson. I am an associate professor at Morgan State University, which is a HBCU in Maryland. It's in Baltimore. What I want to first talk about is piggybacking on what you just said, Dr. Burk, which is that we don't have standards per se for higher education aligned with expectations around enacting evidence-based practices within our classrooms. But we do have expectations through what's called COMAR. This is the body that establishes all the laws for education in the state of Maryland, higher education. And so what you'll see as of 2024, COMAR established expectations that higher education is enacting evidence-based practices. We can move on to the next slide. What's really interesting is when it comes to looking at higher education, specifically in Maryland, is we are interested in that only maybe 40 some odd % of the teachers in the state of Maryland are actually trained in programs that exist in the state of Maryland. We bring lots of teachers from out of the state. So when we start having conversations about teacher training, we tend to get a bit of resistance because a conversation extends from this in terms of how are we controlling the exposures that teachers in our schools who do not come through our programs are receiving that's contributing towards what's going on in classrooms around reading. That said, I represent one of many higher education institutions. Again, I'm an HBCU. There are four. There are about 100 HBCUs in the country. Four of those are located in Maryland. And we started doing this work about 10 years ago. Now, I'm not the only HBCU that does this. A couple colleagues of mine and I, Kristen Wynn being one of them, we've gotten some of our colleagues together who are faculty within HBCUs, and they are doing some very, very good work. So although I'm really excited to have the story, have the opportunity to tell the story of what's going on at Morgan, I'm one of many HBCUs that are doing some really good work around science of reading. Often the story is just not necessarily one that's told. So I'm excited to be here representing Morgan. Morgan, established in about 1867. I don't know if y'all need to know all the history of the institution, but we've been around a long time. So much so teaching was actually the second major that was offered at the institution right after learning to become a preacher. And it's been here. So we are actually the oldest existing major on campus, yet our program for many years was shrinking. That's not something unique to Morgan, but it tells a story about how people are seeing the work of educators in the state of Maryland, and specifically amongst our students. Although Morgan itself was growing, the major was declining. And a part of that, I started at Morgan 14 years ago. A part of that was making some sense of why is it that our numbers are decreasing? What is going on? We think we're doing some good stuff. But what we learned is that we were actually failing many of our teacher candidates, not because we didn't care for them, not because we didn't see them as having really great potential in the classroom, but because we weren't actually teaching them some of the things that they said they needed in the classroom, reading being one of those. So, part of a goal as a faculty, you hear it in education, but I'd imagine a lot of teachers embrace this as well, do no harm. And it's hard to hear your candidates coming back and saying, listen, you didn't prepare me for this. I paid the same tuition as my classmates who are making double and triple what I'm making in engineering and business, and I still didn't have what I need to be successful. That's hard. That's really hard. And so our engagement investment in science of reading was not related to policy, which, as I mentioned, Comar didn't establish that until 2024. It was related actually to failure, and our candidates coming back and telling us we need something different. And one of the conversations I'm sure we will end up having is about support. I can say that we are in a department where my dean trusts us. And when I say us, I mean faculty. When we went to her with this feedback, she just said, what do you need? And part of that was needing training. Part of that was hiring control. And part of that is just openness for us to make some changes that some of our colleagues in the state had not made yet. And so one of my colleagues had a child who was dyslexic and was like, Simone, have you heard anything about Wharton Gillingham? I had not. I come from a balanced literacy background through and through. I hadn't heard about it, but again, recognizing candidates were failing. I had some funding, let's go for it. And when I tell you, okay, so Wharton Gillingham is super specific, right? But when I tell you the light bulbs were going off, literally stuff that my students were saying, I don't know how to do this. I'm getting training like right then, right there on what the problem is, how to address it. And it was just awesome. So from there, I personally did a ton of training from letters to OG. I've done the whole gamut of OG. I did a practicum experience. I mean, anything I could do to learn more about this in terms of how to help my candidates be more successful. That's what I started to do. And it wasn't just me. We had some colleagues who also were like-minded, who we brought into the family. I think a couple of them are here. Heather, I saw your name. We as a family came together making some decisions like we've got to do better for our candidates. And so that's the inception of how it is that we started engaging in evidence-based literacy practice. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned over the past decade or so in doing this work. So you see on the left, you see songs and moods. So part of the training that some of us went to the design school at Stanford in terms of helping us be kind of creative and innovative in terms of the ways that we're engaging our students around some really difficult concepts. One of those activities involved having students align themselves with different songs. So y'all see the songs at the beginning of the semester. on the left screen. Golden. I'm feeling golden. Living my life like it's golden. I'm unstoppable. I smile. It's a lovely day. Listen, they went for it. This is what was given day one of class. Let's go to the end of class, like the last week of class. Got me working day and night. Michael Jackson, y'all. Order my steps, y'all. They praying. The battle is not yours. We fall down. Strength, courage, and wisdom. They are tired. They are overwhelmed, and they are understanding that although this is really important work, it is hard. And that is a real shift from the conversations we were having with students before they graduated from our program before we started doing this work. Part of our goal is not for candidates to graduate from our program with knowing everything there is to know about reading. I don't know if that's possible, or at least we haven't figured out how to do that. Part of our goal is for them to understand a couple things. One, reading is really hard. There's some of us, it's a little easier, and that's great for them. But for the vast majority of us, it's really hard, and we need explicit, specific instruction. That's one. Two, reading and intelligence are not the same thing, right? We had a lot of candidates that made assumptions even about themselves. If I'm not a strong reader, what does this mean about me? It just means you haven't been taught how to read for the vast majority of us. So instilling that message within the students that if you have students who don't read well, it has nothing to do necessarily with their intelligence, but more so about the exposure they've had to reading. Those were two really, really important lessons. And three, failure. What does failure mean and look like? And let's conceptualize that, because we don't want you having a tough experience the first couple of years of teaching, which many do, and quitting. It takes about 6-7 years for you to become even a decent teacher for most of us. So anyway, you see some songs, and also you see a couple quotes from candidates. Learning the ABC song. Oh my gosh, so many of our students feel like if you just know the ABC song, somehow you are prepared to be a great reader. You just see some of the pre and the post. One of the posts after we've gone through all of this, I never, ever, ever with a cherry on top thought it would be this hard. Again, one of the goals that we had for our candidates after we started doing this work is really tough. It takes a whole lot of effort and a whole lot of knowledge. So anyway, we can go on to the next screen. And this is it, because I know, Dr. Burk, we got a little bit of time. I kind of cheated and got into a couple of the lessons learned. I mentioned this, conceptualizing failure. Part of what we were doing that was taking our students away from our major, like they were running away, like feet on fire, running away so quick. We put way too much pressure on our candidates. If not you, then who? You have a responsibility to our community, because we know that about 60-70% of our candidates are going to end up in classrooms with kids who look just like them, which are mostly Black kids. And we put so much pressure on them that at the end of the class, every semester, several were saying, no, thank you. Oh, no, this is too much. So we as faculty had to learn how to minimize the pressure on our candidates while also steeping them in this conversation of humanity and understanding of what's going on in communities and who are the people who are struggling, right? Who are often struggling, or at least we have all the crazy reports on it. The understanding that reading is hard, I mentioned that in the last slide. Candidate identity affirmation. When they're not good on who they are and their backgrounds and how they speak, and the communities that they come from, that evidences itself in terms of the ways that they engage their students. It is real and super important that our candidates got real good, that we as faculty learned how to support our candidates and becoming very confident in who they are. And that starts with how they feel about how they speak and how they feel about how their mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers speak in the communities that they come from, because we see language as the heart of reading. We found that a lot of our students wanted to abandon the structured literacy template that we got them. They felt like initially it wasn't helpful, it didn't meet the needs of students, and they thought they knew more because they know that teaching the alphabet song is going to make a kid read. Like, come on, y'all. So a lot of them felt like, y'all don't know what you're doing. I need to abandon this template. It's not working for my student, until it did. So less is more with our candidates, also not giving them so much autonomy when they're first learning how to do this work. When we talk about science of reading, often we don't talk about the humanity associated with the work. So Lauren, you talked about establishing relationships. That's essential. But what trainings do you go to where they start with conversation about identity and relationships, right? We tend to get into the nuts and bolts of what the brain is doing and what's going on with these specific sub skills associated with reading. But we miss that piece of how do you just make a basic connection with a person so that they'll listen to you. So a part of how we start most of our classes at Morgan is really gained in what we talk about as being cultural responsiveness. And that comprehension piece is something that we're still very much so working on, trying to make those pieces of comprehension really explicit to students. We're still as faculty making sense of that so we can do a better job of communicating that to our students, but this has been an area that we continue to work with. So I talked a little bit about what's going on in Maryland, what's going on with Morgan, and specifically what's going on with our candidates, and that brings my conversation to an end for now.
Well, thank you. Gosh, thank you so much. I do want you, before we start our full panel discussion, to just kind of briefly talk about why it was so important for you to mention HBCUs. What are HBCUs for those who aren't listening? So just a couple of minutes to talk about why that's so important to this conversation.
HBCUs are historically Black colleges or universities, many of which, most of which were established during Reconstruction or certainly after slavery ended. Within about 15 years or so after slavery ended, many are also land grant institutions, which means they got money from the federal government to get their starts. So that's just a little bit about what HBCUs are. The significance is that when we look at funding, so Ron, you talked about what's going on within teacher prep programs. But when we look at institutions themselves and we think about how institutions are funded, very often what we find are our HBCUs who have been here during some of the most racist periods of this history, have educated Black folks in this country for so many years and done some really beautiful work. But their funding looks very different. It tends to be less. The demand tends to be a lot higher in terms of HBCU's edict to take students where they are, regardless of the background, regardless of the education they've received. And they come in and they learn so much that is so important. And we look at what's going on with so many, especially of our Black teachers in this country. Many of them came through HBCUs. And so even though their instruction tends to be phenomenal, and they get a lot of really fantastic work, the stories of what's going on in these institutions tend to be one that's not discussed as openly for many reasons. But when we talk about funding, you know, you might have one person doing 3 or 4 jobs. And if they're doing 3 or 4 jobs, often they don't necessarily have the time to tell the story of the work that they're doing. And that's no different than a lot of institutions. I understand that. But HBCUs have a very special history and role in this country. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Burk.
It does. It does. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, you guys, let's get into it. Ron, I'm going to start with you because you have such a high level view of programs with the evaluations. What are your reactions to like these real life stories, like to what's happening as a statewide system as they are really addressing this call to action around aligning educator preparation programs, and then also, you know, with Simone talking a little bit too about language variations, especially, you know, our African American vernacular, and how that does show up in the report as one of the least, you know, the areas in which there's like least attention towards preparing teachers for that. So I'm kind of start with you with your reactions first.
It's so great to share the panel with Dr. Brannan and Dr. Gibson, because I think they do truly put faces with the data points that we're talking about in our national aggregated report. So I've had the pleasure of presenting before with Dr. Brannan about the work that she leads in Alabama, and you know, I think the spirit of what's happening in Alabama is all grounded in this concept of support, which you heard echoed time and time again about the state taking the lead role in that state of saying, okay, we know we need to change. We've got data now that tells us we need to change, but sitting at the State House and pointing fingers and saying, go change, isn't going to work. And we tried to lift up some examples in case studies in our report of just that, some other states that have followed Alabama's lead and done similar work around pairing high standards with strong support, and then ultimately strong accountability. And that is a necessary bridge to bring about the sort of change we see in places like Alabama, where in our latest review, they're sitting at 90% of their programs earning an A or an A plus. So in rare air among the states. And then listening to Dr. Gibson talk about the way that she was able to change her coursework and her program sort of intrinsically, listening to the candidates and the experiences they were having and where they felt successful and not. I mean, that's exactly what we hope all teacher prep programs are doing. We feature in our report a case study from Winston-Salem State University in North Carolina, and it echoed exactly what Dr. Gibson talked about. They have a really robust partnership with the Winston-Salem Public Schools, where they've got their teacher candidates placed as tutors to support the school district. And they kept realizing the specific ways the tutors were under-delivering strong reading instruction by listening to the candidates and the struggles they were having, by listening to the mentor teachers and their reflections on where the candidates could be improved. And it ended up being a real point of emphasis for the program leaders there to say, like, okay, we've got to double down on our direct instruction of how to meet the needs of English learners, because that seems to be a student subgroup where our student tutors are really struggling. And so they're just building those feedback loops with partners. They're listening to the students in the program. I just think stories like that, like we just heard from Dr. Gibson, are like really inspiring.
All right, and so there are a couple of questions for you, Ron, before I move to this next question. What percentage of universities, and I think you mentioned this, or colleges have not submitted their course syllabi to be reviewed as compared to the 2023 report to now?
Yeah, we were really wondering what was going to happen this time, because in 2023 we had about 701, we had exactly 701 programs in the analysis. And we thought to ourselves, like, wow, if programs haven't made changes, anyone who scored like a D and an F, they're going to opt out. They're not going to submit materials for our review just to get another bad grade. And so we were nervous that our sample was going to be smaller. And actually, we picked up 20 additional programs. So we're sitting at 721 this time around. And I think that's, largely a testament to how much growth there has been in the teacher prep sector. More people wanted to submit materials because they knew that they had done strong work and wanted the recognition, which is, we're happy to give it. So our 2026 report has 721 programs as compared to 701. Now there's some shifting, right? It's not the whole 701 came back. We did see, I think it's around 60 programs that left the sample, and we picked up a bunch of new ones. So yeah, that's where we stand now.
Okay, so for Lauren and Simone, the teacher prep, the student teacher experience has been one where a lot of my colleagues who've reached out who are in this space are asking, like, how do we control for that? I know control is a funny word to use right now, but how do we ensure, and both of you kind of mentioned this, that our candidates are having these valuable experiences? And I know, in some cases, there are universities that are located kind of within communities or with, close to nearby school districts, and they are able to have those conversations. And others, there may not be access to schools that are readily available. How do each of you, just in your different contexts, partner with schools or districts to ensure that your candidates are getting the most unique experiences that they can? And I'll start with you, Laura.
So this is a great question, and this is an ongoing part of our work, a heavy part of our work. Thankfully, in our state, like I mentioned before, we're beginning to see some cohesion about what's happening in our K-6 classrooms and what our candidates are learning. So it's getting easier to find teachers who are teaching the science of reading and using high quality materials. In fact, Alabama only has 2 approved core curriculums that we are allowed to use in our K-3 programs. And so that has allowed our universities to purchase or get access to those curriculum materials and begin integrating those into their classrooms. And so now we're beginning to have some cohesion between what they're practicing in coursework and then what they are using and expected to use when they become teachers and are completing their field experiences. The partnerships are so important for being able to create a base for those high quality field experiences. If we can't just reach out to a random principal and say, hey, can you place five teacher candidates? We need to know a little more about that school, and that requires having some partnership, and it shouldn't be a one-way partnership. We need to find out how in return, how can we support those schools, whether it's professional development or summer learning programs or whatever it may be. It needs to be a two-way partnership. So my partner in this work, Dr. Davis Hales, she has a background of being a principal, and the other half of her role is supporting districts and schools. And so her being in this space supporting higher education has really been an asset, because she has been able to really speak to how do we go about building those partnerships and who should we speak to? What should an MOU look like when we are developing those with our partner schools? We also take advantage of our regional literacy leadership specialists who currently also provide professional development directly to our teacher candidates in our institutions. So we already have relationships there, but they are since they work directly with the principals in the area, in that region, they are a great resource for being able to locate some great locations for field experiences.
Thank you for that.
So I'm going to say something that's real different than Lauren, although that's all really good stuff. I'm going to talk from the faculty perspective. Tenure expectations need to be shifted that evidence how faculty establishing and maintaining these relationships with schools is really important. So I know we're talking about candidate experiences, but y'all know you have the little things, they fall. When one falls, the rest of them fall. Y'all, I'm losing all my words. The domino. When one falls, the rest of them fall. There we go. Thank you. It's a domino effect. So before we get to candidate experiences, we got to back up and talk about a couple things. Tenure for faculty. Right now, about 15% of faculty evaluations are related to service. Establishing relationships with schools, becoming a part of the culture of schools, that's service, and that's 15% of your evaluation. So there's a whole 85 other percent of stuff you're supposed to be doing. But that is at the heart of understanding who are the teachers in the schools, becoming a part of the culture and community of the schools, including ensuring that evidence-based practices are living in really productive ways in schools. That's important. So tenure expectations need to change. Hiring, ensuring that you're hiring folks, again, that's related back to tenure, hiring folks that aren't just about producing research on people that they think they kind of sort of have talked about at some point in their juncture, but are in schools, right? Hiring folks who love teachers and love teaching and admire teachers and teaching. So they're really clear on what are teachers, how are teachers making sense of this? How do I collaborate with teachers to either help support this or to pass this messaging along to my students? It's important. And paying folks, paying mentor teachers. In our program, I think mentor teachers who spend every day of 100 consecutive days with students, they get $500. That's just our program. So maybe that looks different for other programs, but even if it's $1,500, like that's not a ton of money to be spending all day, every day with someone who doesn't know a ton about what they're doing and is trying to learn from you. So those are three areas that I think if those are reaffirmed, you will see teacher candidate experiences being significantly stronger and better.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that to light and for sharing that. And I just do love the unique experiences that we're sharing. Hopefully those who have been watching today can really kind of see themselves, their programs, their efforts, right? And in some cases, we do have lone wolves, right? We have, whether there's a state policy or not, sometimes there are programs that are still struggling to bring these things into alignment. And so there are faculty who say to themselves, I'm going to go, as you mentioned, Dr. Gibson, and take this course on my own because I want to be able to provide this to my students. There are others programs that are initiating this action But there may be some, challenges with monitoring, like what's really happening in classrooms. The syllabus can change. Ron, you know this, right? The syllabus can reflect all the great things, but who's really able to monitor how these things are happening in classrooms? And so we are at the end of our time, but I do have one question for each of you. It's kind of this lightning round before we formally end today. And so, Ron, I'll start with you. Based on the findings, what should educator prep programs prioritize over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think our answer is that we'd love to see additional focus within teacher prep on supporting the needs of diverse student learner groups. I called out some of the data we found, and I think that's an area ripe for.
All right, thank you. All right, Dr. Brannan, if you could define one key ingredient, I know I get these questions too. Just give me one thing. You're like, it's never one thing. If you could define one key ingredient necessary for successful systems level coordination, what would it be?
It's important to have a leader who recognizes the key pieces of the system that must work together cohesively and be able to place the right people in those positions to make things work. And we're lucky enough to have that in our state.
Love that. All right, Dr. Gibson, we'll end with you. What advice would you give to ed prep leaders and faculty who understand what needs to change, but are still figuring out how to make the real change happen within their programs?
Just try something, right? The idea of, what's going to happen if you do the same thing. I would just say, just try something different, something new, go to a new training and try to implement that something, just something small that's tangible and within grasp. Try something and make some sense of, is it effective or not? I would just say, start somewhere, try something.
Thank you. Gosh, that is a great place to end today. I really would like to thank each of you for sharing your wisdom with everyone who has attended this webinar today. And of course, to our participants, thank you so much for attending. You will receive an evaluation, a survey for this webinar, and we will be hosting webinars in the future through TeachSOR. We hope you're able to join us. If you do have any questions to continue this conversation, please email them to us at our TeachSOR email when you will receive your survey. Please make sure that you email us with any questions and also join our community. So thanks again for today, you all, and I look forward to having future conversations.